Here we go. All right, good morning, everybody. Today is Daf Kuf Lamed Vav. We left off yesterday, the bottom of yesterday's Amud, 5 lines from the bottom, Tanya. So it was a good place to stop. Tanya, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer. So says Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Kol Shesha Shleishim Yom Ba'adam Ein Neifel. Once a child passes 30 days, then he is no longer considered an Eiffel. In other words, a child up until the age of 30 is a suffix. Perhaps the child was only 8 months, in other words, in his mother's womb, and therefore we said a baby that which is 8 months is not viable, and therefore would be basically considered an Eiffel. But once you hit 30 days, then you know the child wasn't an Eiffel. What's the nafkamina, right? Obviously, the baby's alive or dead, right? Well, essentially, the nafkamina is as to in terms of maybe yibum or chalitza with the mother, right? We'll get into that halacha. I'll explain later on. But there are the other nafkaminas as to whether the child is. But according to Rosh Gamliel, only once you hit 30 days, then you know the child is viable. Up until then, there's a suffix. We don't know for any baby. It says, when do we do Pinyin Ben? You only do it after 30 days. It must be why? Because before 30 days, you don't go ahead and redeem the child. And similarly, also 8 days when it comes to an animal, right? Also, once it reaches 8 days, then you know the animal wasn't destined to die. Says, and the 8th day, once a baby is 8 days old, then it's fit to go ahead and offer as a korban. Right, so you see that there are time limits. Up until then, there's a suffix as to them, not being a ben kaima. But if it doesn't go that long, then it's a sveka. It's a sveka. It's a suffix. It's a suffix as to whether the child would be considered to be someone that was fit to last. So Gemara says, Gemara wants to know, so that's the case. If that's the case, turn the page in the top of Kuf Lamed Vav. If that's the case, how can you go ahead and give a bris milah? If you hold on Shabbos, if you hold that anybody, right, any baby under the age of 30 days is a suffix, is a doubt whether it will live or not, is suffix neifel. So how could you be Mechal Shabbos for one that was a suffix? Right? For one, this is a suffix. Perhaps the baby was an Eiffel. The baby won't live to 30 days. So how could you go ahead and be Mechal Shabbos? So our answer is, it's actually Mimanav Shach. Now, either way you look at it, you should be able to do it, right? Im Chayhu, if it's a baby that will last after 30 days and be fine, Shapir Kal Ma'il, then it's fine, you give it bris milah on Shabbos. V'im la, but if not, then Mechatek Basaru. Then what? You're not doing a bris milah, right? The baby's considered to be dead. It's like you're cutting meat, right? Well, you're allowed to cut meat on Shabbos, so you're cutting this. It shouldn't be a big deal. You're not doing a bris milah on Shabbos because bris milah is only to somebody who's going to live. It's not a bris milah. So the Elohad, the Tanya suffix ben zayin suffix ben ches in mechalin of the Shabbos. So that which we say is a suffix whether the child was in his mother's womb for 7 months or 8 months in mechalin, right? Because we said 7 months the baby will last. 8 months the baby will not. So it's a suffix we don't know. Ein mechalin is a Shabbos. So why do you say not mechal Shabbos and give bris milah, right? Why don't you go ahead and give a bris milah manav shach? If the baby will survive, then it's going to give bris milah. If not, then you're just considered like you're cutting a piece of meat. So Amar Bereit Ravina Ana v'Rav Nechumin bar Zachariah Targim really hold that even a suffix you go ahead and you give a bris milah to. So even if a child was an Eiffel, it was a suffix zayin, suffix ches, right? We don't know 7 or 8 months. So you do go ahead and give a bris milah. If that's the case, our Mishnah says that a suffix you're not in mechalas Shabbos. So what's the case you don't? So hachinami alinay. So lo yinitzcha ela machshirei milah. Rather, only coming to teach you that any machshirei milah. In other words, let's say you forgot to bring the knife, or you need to go make the knife. So those things we said, right, according to some opinions, you are mechal Shabbos for, and a liba, according to the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, Amar Rabbi. Rabbi Eliezer holds, remember, all machshirei milah, you go ahead and prepare. So even to carry the knife, even to go ahead and sharpen the knife or make the knife or do whatever you need to do, you're allowed to do that on Shabbos. So those things, those preparations, according to Rabbi Eliezer, would not be permitted to do for a suffix zayin, suffix ches. If the child was a suffix as to whether the mother carried 7 or 8 months, but even if it was still a suffix of 7 or 8 months, you would be allowed to go ahead and give a bris milah for a miman of shach. Now, Amir Abai, kit hanoi. So it's actually a machlokes tanaim is how we go ahead and we view the baby. The pasuk says, so the pasuk says, pasuk brought down here on the side, right? If an animal dies, right, that a kosher animal dies, that you're supposed to, that you would have been permitted to eat. If you touch it, you become tamei. So this over here tells us about the tuma of a nevela, right? Nevela is an animal, right, which was not shechted, right? It died of other causes, and therefore the carcass is tamei. One touches it, he becomes tamei. So it says that there. So it's extra. So they darshan the pasuk over there, lahavi, to include ben shmoina shein shchitaso materaso. Now, the question is by a treifa, right? By a treifa, if you go ahead and you shecht a treifa, right? Now the animal is treif, okay? So you're not allowed to go ahead and eat a treifa, right? There's a hole in the lung, right? So we know the halachas of treifa. We learned in Chulin maybe a year or two ago. That by treifa, you're not allowed to go ahead and eat a treifa, right? Treif, right? That's what the common term, right? Oh, it's treif, it's not kosher, right? So treif doesn't mean, treif and non-kosher are two different things, right? Non-kosher means from a non-kosher species, right? And treifa means there's something wrong with the animal. It's a hole in the lung, right? So even if you shecht it properly, you can't go ahead and eat it. So now there's a halacha that even though an animal is a treifa, right, and you can't eat it, if you shecht it, the carcass is not matame. All right, let's learn from the sugim. So the carcass is not matame. So questions like this. Let's say an animal was carried by its mother for 8 months. Now, certain animals, I think cows are supposed to carry 9 months, just like humans. So let's say the cow carried 8 months. So the same halacha, just like 8 months is going to die with an animal, so too is going to die by a human, right? So we say that it's just like a treifa almost, right? Because the animal is destined to die, just like a treifa. A treifa is a hole in the lung. The animal is going to die. It's not healthy. So therefore, it says over there, so it's machlekes. It says over there, so ben shmona shein shchitas mataras, says the Tanakama, if an animal was carried for 8 months, it's shchita does not matahir it. All right? In other words, we don't say that the shchita caused it to lose its status of nevela, just like if it was a treifa. No, the shechita of the animal does make it tahor. It's no longer, right? It's no longer tummy as a carcass of tumas nevela. So my love, one holds is alive. Since it's alive, you go ahead and you shecht it. So therefore, it removes its status as nevela. Well, that one says mesu. That one says it's dead. It's like a walking dead, just like Rav Shimon Gamliel says. If the animal, if a baby doesn't live till 30 days, right? In other words, even before the 30 days, we assume it's dead. So over here, we assume it's dead. The same thing over here, we assume it's dead. So therefore, you're shechting basically a walking dead animal. It doesn't remove its carcass. All right, it's nevela status. And Amarava says, Rabbi Ihachi, why, if that's the case, why are they arguing over here whether the shechita goes ahead and removes whether it makes a tamei or tahor? Why don't you say that? Why don't we talk about achila? Right? Why don't you say that if you hold it's alive and your shechita works on it, you should be able to eat it, right? Just because since the mother carried it for 8 months, you should be able to shecht it and eat it if it's still alive. All right. So elo de kuliyama, we say mesu. Rather, we say everybody holds that if it was carried for 8 months, it's vada going to die. It's considered to be like a walking dead. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Huda, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, Savri, they hold ketreifa. It's just like a treifa. So treifa lav afagav de mesa. Even though a treifa is going to die, he shchita samataras. And never its shchita is mitahirit. It removes its status as bishecht, an animal with a hole in its lung. It's no longer considered to be the veil, and a person who touches the dead carcass will not become tamei. Al-Khanami, so over here, in the case of an animal, if it was carried by the mother for 8 months, right, and then you shecht it, after it's born, you shecht it, right, and then you touch the carcass, you be tahor. So there was no difference. Rabbanan say no. It's not some of the treifa. Why treifa? A treifa at one point was kosher, and then it got a hole in its lung. Right? But this animal, which was carried by its mother for 8 months, it never had a shasa kosher. Right? It was born with this quote unquote birth defect. Right? Because its mother only carried 8 months. It wasn't a viable like calf. So, and therefore, that's the reason why shechting doesn't work. So the Gemara says, right? Well, what are you going to say? There are certain animals. There's two types of treifos. One animal sort of grows like its whole, but there's other animals that are born as a treifa. So an animal that was born as a treifa never had a shasa kosher. So an animal that was born as a treifa is no different than the animal that was born after being carried by its mother for 8 months. They're both considered to be walking dead, right? So Gemara says, no. Over there, at least there's types in the category of treifa. There are those that at one point in time fit to be shechted. Which ones? The ones that were not born as a treifa and eventually became a treifa, but at some point in life they were fit. So therefore, we'll say the shechita on any treifa works. However, but over here, in the case of an animal that was carried by his mother for 8 months, right? All animals that were carried by his mother 8 months are all born as walking dead, right? So over here, we'll say the shechita does not go ahead and work. Fine. The question was asked. So me pligi rabbanan Allah de Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Allah. Do the rabbanan argue with Rabbi Shimon Gamliel and say an animal or a baby or anything that was before its time, right? Let's say 30 days, right, or 8 days by an animal, is considered to be dead, and only after that we know it was alive, or not. And even if they do argue, or not. So Tashmakim, listen. If you have an ego that was born in Yontif, now first of all, it's not considered a muksa as noilad, because if you would have shechted the mother, right, on Yontif, you would be able to eat both the mother and any baby, any fetus inside the mother. So it's not necessarily muksa, because it was fit for Yontif before Yontif. But if it was born, Shanal b'Yontif, Sheichtin Oisel b'Yontif. You could check it on Yontif. But wait, I thought we said earlier, right? We started off today by saying that a baby, once it's 30 days, we know it's alive because pidyon ben. And so too, when we can offer animals as karbanos, we have to wait 8 days, because before then it's a suffix nafil. So how over here, if an animal is born in Yontif, you can go ahead and shecht it on the same day, right? Shechtin on Sabbi Yontif. So how can you go ahead and shecht it? Maybe it's a suffix. It must be that the Rabbanan argue. So Gemara says, no, no, it was known that the animal was not 8 months. That was, the animal was a 9-month baby, right? It was carried by its mother 9 months, and therefore I know it's going to live beyond 8 days. It's not considered to be a walking dead, right? As I defined an animal that was basically only carried for 8 months. Rather, it was full months, and therefore you can go ahead and shecht it on the day of, right? Remember, you can shecht it on the day of, and you can eat it. Just you can't offer it as the korban on the day of. You need to wait 8 days. So Tashma, let's try and bring you another proof. Come listen. It says v'shav, and everyone agrees sheim noilad who. So there's a machlokes by an animal when it comes to bechor, you have to go ahead and show a kohen. So you're not allowed to go ahead and show a kohen on Shabbos. And now, if an animal has a blemish, right, in terms of being fit, right, for the korban, so it has to be declared, it has to have a blemish, right, in order that. I'm just looking at Rashi, right? Bachos and Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, right? They argue whether you can go ahead and show a mum on Yontif, right? That whether it's in order to whether or not it has to go to the Kohen, right? The Bechor has to go to the Kohen. If it has a blemish, then it go ahead and be shechted immediately. But otherwise, then it would not. So otherwise, it has to be offered as a korban, as a right, it has to be given over as a korban. So we say there, if it was born with its blemish, right? That's considered mina muchan. You go ahead and shech it on that day, right? Everyone agrees if it's born with an obvious blemish, then you don't need to go ahead and show it and declare it, right? That's not any violation of Yontif, and therefore it's considered min hamuchan. It's considered to be prepared. You can go ahead and shech it that day. Well, how can you shech it on that day? It's a suffix. It won't live till 8 days. It's a suffix nefel, right? So obviously it must be the Rabbanan argue with Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, because he says anything before 8 days in an animal is a suffix and might die. So over here, so too, it was known that the mother carried it full term. And Tashmak, and listen, Dam Rav Yehuda, Dam Shmuel, halach Rav Shimon Gamliel. We said the halach is like Rav Shimon Gamliel. So why do you have to say the halacha? By the fact that they said the halacha is like Rav Shimon Gamliel, Michlad the pligi must be that the Rabbanan do argue with him. And Shmamina, and indeed we learned from him that there is machlokes, but the halacha is like Rav Shimon Gamliel, that up until then there is a suffix that it might die. And Amar Abaye nafal min agag o achlu ari. Right? Divrei hakol chayhu. If a baby or a child under the age of 30 days, fell from a roof and died, or a lion ate it. Everybody holds up until then, it was considered to be chai, right? Since these were unnatural deaths. So keep you into the argue, basically when the baby yawns and dies, right? Something very weak and feeble, and basically dies naturally. That's keep one holds is it was considered alive, and some freak accident happened and it just died, but it really wasn't considered to be a nafil, right? Umar Saber Mesu, that one says no, by the fact that it died from yawning, right? It died from something so so small, minuscule. It must be that it was a nafil. It must be that it was basically the mother, the mother carried the baby for 8 months, and that's why it died. So lamai nafkamina. So what's nafkamina? Leave tomina yibum, right? So let's say pater, an adult from yibum, right? In other words, there's a halacha that if a man dies and he has no children, right? So then the brother should take the wife and marry him. That is called the mitzvah of yibum, right? The mitzvah of yibum. Now let's say the woman or the man, right, do not want to go ahead and marry one. She does not want to marry the brother. She has an option of chalitza. Now let's say the brother before he died had this baby, right? Had this baby and it died premature. So even if you had a baby, right? Let's say you had a baby and the child died at the age of 6. Right, so that's considered to be having a baby. If the brother dies and there's no children left, right, then the woman does not need yibum chalitza. She can marry whoever she wants. However, so the question is, if there was a child, right, there was a baby, and the baby died. Let's say it was killed by a lion at the age of 2 weeks. So does the woman need to do yibum chalitza or not? If the father dies afterwards, or right, so that's the machlokes. Or if the baby yawned and died, so also that's the question of is there yibum chalitza? So in other words, the nafkamina is whether to pater the mother from yibum chalitza. So nafkamina gago achlo ari divra kol chayus. If you say that the baby died, right, or a lion ate it, right, or falling from the roof, that everyone says it's chai, is considered to be alive, and therefore it would pater the mother from yibum or chalitza. I vaha Rav Papa Rav Huna Braid Rav Yeshua equal the bay Braid Rav Idi Barav. And one time they're by the house of Braid Rav Adi Vevelu Igla Tilsa Biyamama the Shiva. One time, so they made the third calf, which is supposed to be like the finest meat of the animal. They made it on its 7th day. So they shechted an animal on its 7th day, very fine, right, good calf meat. Ramileni said to him, "Isarichtu le ad orsa haviachlina minei." Right? If you would have waited one more day, I would have eaten from this animal. But you shechted this animal, you ate this animal on the 7th day. In other words, so we see according to him that he holds it has to be 8 days. The animal has to be 8 days old because other than that, it's a suffix, right? So Ella, right? So and what kind of death is it, right? You shechted it, right? So shechting is an unnatural death, or it's not a case of yawning. It's more of a case of a lion ate it or falling off the roof, right? It's not a natural death when a guy takes a knife and chops your head off, right? That was the death of the animal. So you see, even an unnatural death is still considered to be a suffix. So how could you say if a lion ate a baby or the baby fell off the roof and it died, it's called, then it's a vadai chai. What we see over here, if it was a vadai chai by shchita, then he shouldn't be able to eat it on the 7th day. But he said, no, you needed one more day. So Ella, Shapie Kumes, if the baby yawns and dies, Divra Kol Meis, so everyone says in that case, it's obvious the child was an aphil, right? And therefore, if that happens within 2 weeks of the mother, it was considered to be an aphil, and she would have to be a chalitza. So Kivli, when they argue, they argue the case of the baby falls on the roof and the lion eats it. Marsav Mesu, one holds, Lamai said died and never lived to 30 days. Therefore, it was considered to be an aphil, even though, despite the fact it died from unnatural deaths. Marsav Chayu, and the other one held that it was chai, and the other one held it alive. And fine. Berei de Rav Dimi, so the son of Rav Dimi, Bar Yosef, he told that Hayunuka had a baby that was born to him, the good Tlasa Yamin Shachim, and died within 30 days. So Yosef took his Avil Aleo. So he went and he was sitting Shiva. He was sat Shiva for a baby under 30 days. So Amalei, Avuas, his father said to him, right? You want to, you like the food from Shiva? Is that what you want? You like mourner's food? Why? In other words, he's saying, why are you sitting Shiva? Right? The child did not live till 30 days. You're not obligated to go ahead and sit Shiva. Samarlei, Kim Li Bei Shechalo Chadash. I know for the time when he was born, that his mother basically was carrying him for 9 months. So therefore, it wasn't a baby that was carried for 8 months. Rather, it was one that was carried for a full 9 months. And therefore, even though, despite the fact it died within 30 days, it was considered to be alive. Rav Ashi, Rav Kahana, similarly, Rav Ashi he went to go ahead and visit by the house of Rav Kahana. Yisrael Bei Milsa, and once again, there was a tragedy. Baby died within 30 days. And Chazid Yosef becomes Avila. He saw that he was sitting Shivas. Amar lei, lo yisrael lei, Mar lahad Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. You don't like that which Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel says, halach Rav Shimon Gamliel. The halach is like Rav Shimon Gamliel said that something that any baby before 30 days is a suffix mace, and therefore you wouldn't have to go ahead and sit Shiva. So once again, he was certain that he knows that the mother carried the baby for the full 9 months. Fine. Itamar, bottom line. So let's say that the baby died within 30 days. And she went up and she married somebody else. In other words, she held that basically, even though despite the fact that the baby died before 30 days, she was free from Yibum or Chalitza. She didn't have to go ahead and marry the brother. She went ahead and married somebody else. So basically, not like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, because Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, at the very least, it's a suffix nathel. So she went ahead and married somebody else. And Omar Ravina, so says Ravina Mishmei the Rabba, says Ravina's name is Rabba, Im Eishes Yisrael, right? Very nice surprise when you turn over the page, right? You'll see short Amma, right? So you say, so Im Eishes Yisrael, if we see it's Eishes Yisrael, he choletzes, then if it's Eishes Yisrael, in other words, if she went ahead and married a Yisrael, right? In other words, so therefore, okay, no big deal. Go ahead, do chalitza, and then go ahead and do kedushin again, right? It's no big deal because, why? Because a Yisrael is allowed to go ahead and marry a woman who's a chalutza, right? A woman who performs chalutza. However, im Eishes Kohen, but Eishes Kohen, who was forbidden to a chalutza or to a grusha, all of a sudden it's a problem, because if we say that husband number 2 is a Kohen, he can't marry, he's allowed to go ahead and marry a widow, right, unless he's a Kohen Gadol, but he's not allowed to go ahead and marry a chalutza or a grusha. So it's not so simple. So he says, however, then we don't go ahead and do chalitza. You know, you can be makel there. And Rav Shravia Mishmei the Rabba Omar achazu v'achazu chaletzas. Either one, you go ahead and do chalitza. Even if it's a kohen that we say, you know what, it's too bad. Mir is a kohen, then she has to do chalitza. Now all of a sudden she's forbidden to. And Amar later Ravina Rav Shravia says the Ravina to Rav Shravia, but Orza Amar Rav Hachi. In the evening, Rava said this. However, the Saf in the morning, he was chayzer. He said, no, if it was Eishes Kohen, you don't go ahead and have to do chalitza. Samarlei, Sherisia, right? You matered this, right? You matered her going ahead and staying with the Kohen, Yehiroa, the Tisha Tarba, right? You should go ahead and it's like you're permitting other fasts, right? Right? You should be mater forbidden fats. In other words, you're forbidding, you're saying a woman who's forbidden is allowed to do it. It's the same thing. You should continue to do your unjust ways, and you should mater fats. 2 dots. Rabbi Yehuda mater b'chule. So back in our Mishnah, we're talking about being Mechal Shabbos for Bris Milah. We say you can go ahead and be Mechal Shabbos for Bris Milah. And Rabbi Yehuda was Machlokes by Androgynous. We said in our Mishnah, I was reading back on Kuf Lamed Daled on base, instead of there a suffix, a case of saga, which you just discussed, which was basically a child, whether it was 7 or 8 months or 8 or 9 months, carried by his mother. And an Androgynous, 8 Mechal Shabbos. We're not Mechal Shabbos, we're Androgynous, right? Someone who has basically both male and female genitalia. You do not do the bris milah on Shabbos, you're not mechal Shabbos, because it's not a vadai boy. And Rabbi Yehuda matir b'andrigynous. He says, no, you vadai, go ahead and give the bris milah for an andrigynous on Shabbos, or mechal Shabbos. So says the Gemara. So Rabbi Yehuda matir b'chulei. So Amrav, she's the Amrav Chisa. Loy lekol Amrav Rabbi Yehuda andrigynous zachar. Not for everything does Rabbi Yehuda hold that an male. In other words, over here, he holds it's a male, because you go ahead and you give a bris milah because it's a kosher bris milah, right? So he says, "Lo lekol Amar Rabbi Yehuda andrigynous zachar hu she'im at oimer." Can they say be'erchin yarech? By erchin, a person says, "I make a vow to the value of a person." He makes it's called an erech vow. So the Torah sets values, a set value. We don't go with a certain types of person value in terms of his value on the slave market, how much he would be. Some people are worth more than others, but when it comes to an erech vow, everyone is the same. In terms, it has to do with gender and age. Now, if someone says it about androgynous, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if you hold this a male, he should be androgynous, should be no different than a male. But we know that by androgynous, right, it's not like that. So we see that Rabbi Yehuda holds by erchin, it's not the same like bris milah. By bris milah, we consider him to be a male, but by erchin, we do not consider him a male. And where do we see that by when it comes to erchin that he's not considered androgynous is not considered to be a male? The Tanya in the Brisa it says hazocher. It says over there the hazocher loy tumtum androgynous, and not a tumtum, not somebody basically who doesn't have either one of the genitalia or androgynous or both. So so maybe he's not considered a man, but he's considered to be a woman there. Tamalaymar hazocher, right? V'im the keva he. Right, it says over there hazachar, and if it's an or it's a nekeva, it has to be definite zachar or definite nekeva. So zachar vadai, nekeva vadai is only when it comes to a definitive zachar and definitive nekeva. However, and over there v'loy tumtum androgynous, but it excludes a tumtum androgynous, that there is no such thing as an erech vow when it comes to a tumtum and androgynous. The Stam Sifrei, which is going to get to the Mishnah, the Stam Sifrei, Rabbi Yehuda, and the Stam Sifrei. This was said in the Sifrei over there in Taras Kohanim in Vayikra. And the Stam Sifri is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. So we see, since Rabbi Yehuda was the author there, that excludes an androgynous from an erech vow, we see Rabbi Yehuda does not always say an androgynous, right, is considered to be a male. And Amar Rav Nachman by Yitzchak Avanim Tanino also learned, Hakol Ksheim Lakadesh, everyone is fit to go ahead and mix the ashes of the paraduma into the spring water. When it comes to we sprinkle for the paraduma in order to go ahead the process to make people tahor from tumas mace. So anybody can go ahead and add the water. So hakol kadesh chutz mecher sheit v'katan, except for a person, a deaf mute, right? A person who's crazy, or a cotton. And Rabbi Yehuda machshir b'katan. Rabbi Yehuda says no, a cotton go ahead and mix the ashes into the spring water. Upaisa, but he says, no, you know who can't? The Isha of androgynous, right? A woman can't and an androgynous can't. So what do you see over there? That androgynous is not considered to be a male, because if an androgynous was considered to be a male, he would be able to go ahead and mix the mechatas. So the Shramina. If that's the case, so why is bris milah different? Why does Rabbi Yehuda say bris milah is like a boy? The pasuk says, "Kimo lachem kol zacher." Kol zacher comes to include even someone who's androgynous, even someone who has both male and female genitalia. And we'll stop here. Everyone should have a wonderful day. Yeshar Kayach.